Hello, YouTube. It's Lion here with Hobbies of a Man once again, and today we are talking about original English light novels. Now, today we are going to be reviewing Isekai Monster #1. This is written by Akos Esthoth, and it is self-published. Now, the genres here are Isekai and dark fantasy, I would say. And this is an original English light novel, like I said. Now, this does not have an adaptation, obviously, and yeah, that's basically it. Now, this is a bit difficult to do, right? Because this is probably the first time that I did not love reading something that was self-published. I have really had a really good time reading a lot of self-published works, either the Harem-lit, Game-lit region, or the original English light novels that I've read so far. This one was rough. It was difficult to read, and it's not because the story elements, the plot, the characters, the world building was bad. It's because the structure needed a lot of work, and I'll kind of go into that in a bit more detail later, right? But first, let's start with the premise. So, Isekai Monster is about a neurodivergent man getting sent to a new world via summoning. And after acclimating to this world, he has to deal with a coup, overthrowing of government, right? So why did I call him a neurodivergent man? Now, it's because I don't know what he has or what's different about him, but he's not neurotypical. He's not a regular guy. He talks about putting on faces for people. He says, I'm going to hit them with 7 or put on 8 or whatever. And he clearly has problems that are not standard. I would say he's a psychopath or a sociopath, but he doesn't enjoy killing, and he's not completely apathetic. He's just not all that. He's just not normal, right? And I don't want to say he's autistic either, because one, I don't know enough about autism to be like, yeah, those are what autistic people would identify. That's what autistic people would identify with and stuff. So I did not want to use a specific label. So he's just not normal. He's neurodivergent. He's not neurotypical. And it's interesting, but the execution of the writing was a bit rough, and it kind of ruined a bit of the enjoyment that I got out of this story. Now, I did not read this that difficult. I did not have a difficult time reading this. It was actually pretty easygoing. I read it in about 5 hours. I had no problem digesting the content. However, it was not an enjoyable reading experience because of the structuring. Now, we'll get into the specifics of that now, but I want to evaluate the general stuff first. So the plot line is fine. The individual elements are okay. There's nothing bad about it. It's a prologue, which is essentially a flash forward that you eventually catch up to, like around midway through the book. And then you have the initial setup, which is the summoning, character introductions, and then the next part is learning and assimilating to this new world, and then, a bunch of battles. That's all fine. That's all normal. Very understandable. However, the execution could have used work. And what I mean with execution is that you have to rework how you do things. Now, Akos Esthoth has a very compelling story, a very compelling character. And he told me, I don't mind. I know that my writing is not the best in this book, but this is a story I need to tell. And I'm like, okay, perfect. Tell your story. However, this definitely needs work. Now, this is not his first book. I think at this point he has 11 books published, all in the series. But I think this one needs a rework, if not a rewrite. So, the prologue. I saw a video about this. It was a video by iWriterling. I'll put the video up here in the card so you guys know what I'm talking about. And it's that your prologue should not be one thing and then the first chapter be another. And in this case, that's exactly what happened. Our prologue is in the middle of the action from a perspective that's not our main character. It's from the perspective of this guy called Michael Ash or something. He's like a fire wizard and another hero. And we get him first, and we think that he's the main character, that he is going to be what the story is about. And I definitely felt, this is definitely an isekai monster. The guy that is here because he was like psycho. He was like mad that he didn't get all of the traditional isekai harem girls, all of this stuff. And I was like, yeah, this guy is definitely monstrous. He has problems. This is going to be interesting. But then the first thing that we see right after the prologue is completely different. It's about this other random dude that gets introduced. And it just caused disconnect with me as a reader when I started reading this, because I was really expecting something and then it happened to be something else. And the video I'm talking about, I Ratterly, definitely tells you that this is a very bad thing. She used to be a editor slash, literary agent. So she definitely knows what she's talking about. And that's why I'm using her as a source, because it's not just me talking out of my ass. So this prologue should have been switched or worked out differently. You could remove it completely as well, but I would say that the prologue system works. I think it's good to have a prologue and then jump into the action. But I think that the prologue should have been all of the stories and stuff that was mentioned about the main character Seige at the end of the book, because that's another thing with the structure here, that the beginning and the end had nothing to... Okay, the beginning had to do with the main plot line, but it was not... the fact that you were jumping like 100 pages ahead was kind of weird. It just... because you were like, okay, when am I gonna get to this part? When am I gonna get to this part? And then you just never did. And then when you did, it was already like too late. You were just like not interested anymore. So that was a problem with the prologue. The ending did have kind of the story, and it cleared up the mystery of Seige. And I think that would have been better at the beginning than at the end, because Seige's mystery, this whole kind of problem that he has, felt like you were forcing it to be a secret, or like Akos was forcing it to be a secret slash mystery instead of letting it be a natural mystery. And the problem was that it was in first person, so you're literally seeing all of the problems and you're in the head of Seige. So he has problems because he doesn't think like a normal person, but you just don't know what it is, and he never tells you, which he would tell you. It would be in his own thoughts if, the first person was actually working normally. But because, it felt like Akos was trying to make it a secret, a mystery, it felt really off, and it didn't feel like it was, correctly mysterious. So that was another problem there. And the last part that was, problematic, I guess, is that there was too much repetition of the first event. The first event is the summoning of Seige from Japan to the world that they are in Isekai Monster. This medieval, magical Europe kind of setting. And we have the first 60 pages, which is like 5 chapters, is all the same thing. It's all repetition of the same 5 pages of plot line. It's literally like the same thing happening from like 6 perspectives, and it doesn't add anything. All it does is help you introduce a new character, but a new character's perspective. But these characters didn't really need to have perspectives. They could have just been introduced through Seige, right? Through Seige's eyes. He could have just been like, oh yeah, the queen or the princess also has this knight with her, who is the white knight who has all of these powers, and he's also Japanese, which is interesting, and it's helpful to my like psychopathic mind to be able to analyze how he works compared to everyone else to kind of see what the problems are. It would have been much easier that way, and it would have cut down on the book a lot, because the first 60 pages, which are, those 5 different perspectives of the same event, are just kind of padding. Like, they don't particularly add anything that you couldn't add in a more streamlined way before. Now, I don't know, man. It's kind of difficult. Like I said, the proper plot, the elements of story that are in here are not bad. It was just the execution was a bit poor. And I don't know. I'm excited to read the next one to see the growth between one book and the next. But it's kind of difficult to enjoy reading something when it feels really rough. Even if the parts that are interesting, it's kind of difficult, But that's basically it. Oh, so I'll that's not really it. Besides, I want to talk about the usage of perspective. It was kind of difficult to understand whose perspective it was with one character to the next, because they all had very similar voices. And that's, I guess, a rookie mistake. I'm not a writer, so I don't necessarily know the techniques and what defines a novice writer from a, well-written writer. But I do know what, as a reader, comes off as amateurish and what does not. And all of the characters sounding the same definitely feels amateurish. And I don't know how it works for Akos. I think, because I know he has like 11 other books. So I assume that this is his original work and he didn't modify it before he turned it into a print book. But I'm not sure. Because this has been available for a while in an ebook format, and it only just became a proper printed book. So I assume that that's what he did. I would have personally, if I was him, I would have remastered the book and then printed it, but I'm not really sure. So what else is there? So the perspectives. Okay. Switching perspectives is fine. However, you have to make it clear that perspectives are shifted. And this was not clear in this book, because sometimes there was chapter titles and sometimes there were character names. And this is a problem because when you have a character name and then a chapter title, you have no clue who the person that is talking is until something gives it away. And if you're reading 2 or 3 pages before you know which character is talking, it's very difficult to get into it. I'll give you an example of when it's done correctly, or when it's done well. So we're going to look at Rick Riordan. Rick Riordan did 2 different books with Percy Jackson in them. The first set of books was the original Percy Jackson and the Olympians, where it was always Percy's perspective, from what I recall. And he had chapter titles. If I remember correctly, he had chapter titles. And each chapter was titled to fit the little short story that the chapter entails. However, when he wrote Heroes of Olympus, he did not have any chapter titles. What he had instead was character names. And each character name told you clearly, hey, the story is progressing linearly, but now you're switching perspectives. And if it was necessary to go back and look at the same thing from a different perspective, you understood that very clearly because you knew who was talking. In this book, it was difficult to tell who was talking at any given moment because it would flip-flop between a chapter title and a name. So that's just something I noticed. It might be a stylistic thing, but I think it would work much better if there was consistency on whether it's chapter titles or perspective changes. Hopefully, you guys understand what I'm talking about. Now, the characters here. Again, the characters are interesting individually. Seige is a very interesting character. I've never read a book where the main character was like completely different from me, even in terms of how he thought. The closest I can think of is Shield Hero, And the only thing that Shield Hero had that's beyond normal is that, you know, Naofumi was like super hella depressed. And that was interesting. I really enjoyed that. This was really interesting too. But again, the plot execution, the structure of the story was a hindrance. But Seige is very interesting. Some of the other characters are really interesting as well. Michael was interesting because he was actually a lot more monstrous than Seige was, but he was a lot more normal than Seige, so he didn't come off as weird. And the princess was kind of interesting. Some of the other characters were kind of interesting as well. And I would have really liked to see more of them. However, I did mention that a lot of the characters feel the same, and it was mostly the female characters. The princess, the maid, and the other maid, like the princess's maid and the head maid, all sounded very similar to me. And the only ones that were clearly distinct were Michael and Seige. Suzuki, the old knight, was not that clearly defined. Sometimes I thought it was the maid, the head maid, and sometimes I thought it was Seige when it was talking about his chapters. So it was a bit difficult to discern all of the characters. However, that would have been a lot easier if the chapter thing was set up differently. But yeah, they were definitely interesting. It was just that execution again. And that's really the only problem I have with this book. It's the execution and the structure of the book is a problem. Everything else is fine. Yeah, so one thing, okay, there was one problem with Seige's character, and it's that it was that mystery that felt forced that I talked about earlier. And beyond that, it was actually more the problem with Seige and his expressions. He didn't tell you, hey, I smiled, which was expression 1, or I, you know, smoldered, which was expression 4, or whatever. He never told you what expression was what. He told you what characters reacted to those expressions. But every character reacted slightly different. Some of them would just faint at some expressions, and it just like, what expression causes you to faint? It makes no sense. So I would have liked it that every time a new expression was, you know, mentioned, like he used 7 a lot, and that would cause the princess and the maids to faint, which I guess is because he looked so attractive. He was such a bishojo, a bishonen, that they fainted on the spot from how hot he was. At least tell me what expression he's making. Is it a dazzling smile? Is it a smoldering gaze? What is the expression? And what does it signify to Seige? What is Seige trying to copy? That would have made a lot more sense. It would have made the mystery a lot more less forced. It would have been clearer to the reader, because it's difficult to be reading in first person when you're supposed to be feeling what the character feels, and then not know what these expressions are, what these things he's doing are. It's very difficult to assimilate yourself or combine yourself with the character in first person when you don't know what the character is doing. It's very difficult. And yeah, his mystery felt forced and unnecessary, especially when the mystery gets completely unraveled at the end of the book. That should have been the introduction, and then kind of him remembering right before he gets summoned. That would have worked way better. That would have been a lot more clear, and it would have explained a lot of Seige beforehand, which would have been much better. It would have made the story go a lot smoother. You would have started to root for Seige instead of be really confused by him, and that's really good, I think, in my opinion. That would have been a lot better. Overall, it was okay. The only problem with the characters was that Michael felt like the main character at the beginning because of the prologue, but I already mentioned that, so we'll leave it at that. That's it for the characters. Now the world building. This was probably my favorite part because it's difficult to mess up structurally with world building. However, there was a problem here, so I'll get to that later, but it could be worse. So magic medieval Europe, that's basically the setting. There's magical technology in the sense that there's arrays, or like magic circles, which are magical arrays that you fill with mana, and then they do something for you. And the country that Sega gets summoned to is the only one that can use them, because they're the only ones that have enough mana, because they're the only ones that have a lot of heroes. So they have a lot of heroes, and heroes have genetically created huge amounts of mana. And then when they have a lot of children, all of the kids have a lot of mana too, and then it kind of disperses along the kingdom, which makes a lot of sense. It was really well done. It was good. That part was really interesting, because you literally have like super powered individuals in one kingdom compared to all the other kingdoms, and it works well. The magic system was pretty good. It felt really interesting, but the execution was a bit poor, because we had like 6 pages of info dumping where it was literally just like this old scribe character, or this old like wizard character, and the only thing he did was just tell you exactly how the magic worked for 5 pages. That sucks. That's super boring. First of all, it's boring. Second of all, it feels like you're reading a textbook. And third of all, it didn't work well, because when Seige asked a question about how the magic worked, the answer was, oh, well, we don't know. It just doesn't work like that. But if you have so much detail, you specifically about how one, aspect of magic works compared to another, why would you not have an answer to what Seige asked, which was a really simple question? It makes no sense. It was just bad execution. The ideas were good. The idea is interesting in the sense that, like, there's 8 different magic types, or 10 different magic types. I'm not sure. Each magic type can do 3 things. You can manipulate the element of the magic. You can strengthen, or you can weaken. Strengthen yourself or weaken your enemy. And there's different like subcategories of stuff. Like you can have mana vision or whatever. Like you can see what the other person is doing, which is a really good tactical boon, because you can think ahead of what they're gonna do. Some cancel out, some don't cancel out. Some have more strengths and weaknesses than others, and it's not balanced per se, but it kind of all makes sense. But when Seige asked such a simple question and the answer is no, it doesn't work like that, and we don't know why, that was a really bad, situation. What are some clear elemental magic systems? I think Codex Alera has a really clear magic system. It's literally just like there's 6 types of elements. They counteract each other in certain ways. Like earth can beat fire and stuff like that. And it's not that mystical. It's very clear. And I think that was a problem here, that it seemed like Akkas was not sure if he wanted a hard magic system or a soft magic system. Given that he had so many rules, I'm guessing that he wanted a hard magic system, but wanted to keep some of that, mystique of magic. And so that's why the answer to Seige's question was, oh, we don't know why that happens. But that was a poor decision, because if you have so much structure, it doesn't make sense that suddenly this one question just has no answer. A good example of this is Stormlight Archive. The Spren in Stormlight Archive power a lot of the things that, the Stormlight Archive has available. And the Stormlight Archive clearly has the discovery of magic as part of the progression. And the magic has very clear rules, but those rules have been discovered. And so when you don't know an answer to some of the magic, it makes sense because, it just has not been discovered yet. But that was not the setup that Akkas did in this book. So it felt a little rough. But beyond that, everything was clear. Everything was okay. Beyond that one thing that really was not that big of a deal, it's just like that was the issue I noticed, and it like compiled with all the other execution problems. But that's it. So, art here. Well, there's no art, and that sucks. I think that light novels do not require art. Monogatari has no art in it, and there's other types of light novels that are like more for adults that don't feature any art. J.K. Haru, and I think Yen Press is publishing one that does not have any art as well. So it's not necessarily necessary to have art in your light novels. But light novels tend to have art. And it's very clear that it's very expected to have at least one or two images in your book if you're selling it as an original English light novel. Is it necessary? No. Would it have been pretty good to have? Yes, I think it would have been really good to have, because it would have taken a little bit of the edge off some of the problems, because okay, it's okay, there's a problem here, but I get to enjoy this piece of art. I would have personally really liked that to happen. However, I understand that if you're self-publishing, it might be difficult to get an artist to make art for you. It might be difficult to afford it. I understand. I don't find any issue with it not being there. I just think it would have been nice to have it. And there's no fan service either. There was some moments where there is talk about women or men in kind of like sexual manners, but it's very minimal. It's not very important. The only point here is that this is an adult world and people think like adults, and they focus on, sexual things. That was fine. It was no problem with it, but it's there. But yeah, that's basically it. Now, my rating for this, I know my talk about this was very negative. I understand that. However, it's not actually that bad. I think this is a solid 2.5 to 3 out of 5. It's in the average range in terms of what the story is about. The execution is poor, but it's possible that if you're just reading, you won't even notice that much. I notice it because I'm reviewing it. The point of me reading is to see all of these problems so I can tell people about them. If you're just a casual reader, it might not even be that noticeable, okay? So that's my 2 cents on that. My rating is a 2.5, 2, or 3. Let's just leave it at 3. 3 out of 5, that's fair. I think that's a pretty good estimate about what this book is. Do I recommend it? If you're interested in the idea of a sociopathic main character, then yes. If you want to read further and you're interested in supporting this author, then yes, read it. That's it for me on that as well. Are there any similar titles that I can think of? No, not really. Do I have any last minute things to say? Yes. There was a slight problem here, and that was that there was no consistency between numbers. Now, when I learned in high school, when I was talking to one of my teachers that used to write books for a living, they told me, 1 through 20, you have to write out. Beyond 20, you can use the number, but in written books, it's preferable that you use, written out numbers always. So if you're gonna write 20, don't do 2 and 0, do TWENTY. There was a problem here because a lot of times that numbers were used, there was a number like symbol. It was like a 1 or a 2. It was not OEN or TWO. And it was inconsistent. Like, there was one page where like you had numbers used several times, and one time it was written out and one time it was just a symbol, and it was annoying because it was not consistent. Now, this is not a real problem. It's just those small details that tell you, hey, this guy wrote this all by himself, edited it by himself, and he didn't get anyone to look it over, which might not actually be true. It's just the type of thing that you see and that you immediately feel when you're reading something that's self-published. Even if it's not true, is the perception you get. The other thing I noticed was that Akkas took inspiration from a few other things. And I'm not actually sure if he did, but they clearly felt like they did. He mentioned free cities in quotation marks, which sounds almost exactly like free cities in Game of Thrones. Like, they're free of the other things that the mainland is about. They do their own thing. They're not about slavery. They're not into all that stuff, and they were called the free cities. That clear Game of Thrones stuff. And the other thing is that there was these like hidden ninja guys, and they wore these black tattered cloaks with ribbons of cloth. That sounds like Mistborn attire from Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn. Now, that's not actually a problem. It's kind of interesting to see where, self-published authors get their inspiration from. However, as a self-published author, anytime you do that, it feels like you're copying and combining stuff that's not your own. And that's kind of difficult to kind of get away from, because it makes people think that you're just copying, which is something that, the guy that wrote Aragon, Christopher Paolini, dealt with when he was a teenager, because he wrote Aragon when he was a teenager. And it's very clearly just an amalgamation of Star Wars, Wheel of Time, and Lord of the Rings. And because of that, he had a lot of flack thrown at him. I would recommend that self-published authors stay away from referencing other literature in their own books, just to evade any of those possible, the perception problems. Now, it's different if you're making a clear reference, like, hey, this is not mine, this is someone else's. That's fine, especially if you're doing pop culture stuff. But if you're writing something and what you wrote is almost exactly like someone else's work, it's kind of difficult to be like, oh yeah, that was just a reference, and not call it stealing or plagiarizing or heavy borrowing. You know what I'm saying? It's not really a problem. It's just something I noticed, and I was like, huh, that's from this place, that's from that place. I think I noticed something else as well, but I can't remember. I just remember Free Cities and the Mistborn attire. Like I said, it's entirely possible that these were not based on them, but it's a little too on the nose for it to not be. But yeah, that's basically it for me. Like I said, this was okay. This was not horrible. My review does come off a bit unhappy, but it's not really unhappy. It's just there's these problems and they affect the story, and I have to tell you because I'm a reviewer. That's kind of my job. Or not my job either, but what I'm trying to do here on this channel. So that's it. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you did enjoy, please subscribe, and comment down below. Let me know what you guys thought. And yeah, thank you guys.